Welcome to the Safety First podcast. I'm Jason.
I'm Abby, and we're from Proud to be Safe. Together with the team at WSHAsia, this podcast will be the platform where stories are shared, including safety tips and advice you can use in the workplace. If you know someone who has a story to tell, Safety First is here to help you by giving you a voice. Please get in touch.
Safety is our top priority.
We all know that mental well-being at the workplace is a focus where it becomes part of the job for most of us. In this episode, we have invited clinical psychologist Ms. Twinkle Lok to share with us on the importance of caring for our mental well-being at the workplace.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Safety First podcast. It's me, Amanda, and here with us we have Kajol. And today we have a very special guest. It's Miss Twinkle Lok. Hi Twinkle, welcome to the podcast.
Hello everybody, hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for having me.
We feel very nervous when we talk to clinical psychologists because we always feel very
there's a gap.
Okay. Well,
I think you're more knowledgeable. The way you view things, it'll be different than how we view things. Yeah, but it will be so nice to hear what you think.
Right. Well, I think it's important to put it forth that, although the job says clinical psychologist, at the end of the day, I'm still really just a normal person living a normal life. But with that being said, I'll try my best to kind of share what I know, and hopefully that will be helpful for everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Twinkle. So just a quick backstory. We have known each other for a very long time. So this is going to be quite a chill podcast episode. And if you have any questions, please do let us know in the comments. I know this, but I just want to ask again, how long have you been in the industry? How long have you been in this field?
Right. So I have been practicing or actively seeing clients for the past, I think, three to 4 years. I can't even remember at this point. 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, right? But of course, that really started when I took up my master's in clinical psychology. Before that, I was doing my degree in psychology. So it kind of depends on where you mean, start. But I guess it's been a pretty long time, kind of, learning about human behavior, human feelings, and all that.
Yeah, and it's stated here that you do therapy for adults and children, so that's like a very wide range of
Yeah, because unfortunately there's not enough of us to go around. I think I've last heard that in Malaysia itself there is like a ballpark of 400-500 of us for the whole nation. So there's no luxury of choosing what you like to do or what you don't like to do, but yeah, we've all been kind of trained to be able to handle as many different kind of issues and clienteles as possible.
So Twinkle, can I ask you, what is your educational background like? Like, where did you do your master's and your degree?
Right. I did my master's locally, so right here in Malaysia in Help University. It was one of the few programs available at that time. And a little while before that, my degree was in Warwick in UK. Yeah.
Wow. So I want to ask you these specific questions,
burning question.
Why clinical psychologist?
Right. So to begin with, just a little explanation about what clinical psychology is about. So a lot of it, of course, is understanding human behavior, human thoughts, and human feelings. But the word clinical comes from the place of understanding it in terms of normality and abnormality. So this comes together with things like depression, anxiety as disorders, right? So a lot of what I do deals with those who are struggling with mental health disorders, right? And I suppose, this really came from a personal encounter with mental health issues myself. I think the story is really long, so I'm going to compress it as much as I can. But as a child, I faced a traumatic incident myself. And it was, something that a lot of people thought was something that happens every day to a lot of children, right? So basically it was a case of teacher being quite, bullying, abusive, right? It really depends on how you can go about it, right? And I think myself at that point in time, I started experiencing what we call psychosomatic symptoms. So I started having fevers that no one could cure. I had a lot of physical problems that I went to hospitals in and out. No one seemed to be able to find a cause or do anything about it. And when a psychiatrist suggested that, hey, maybe this is psychological, this had something to do with, her emotions, and I was removed from that stressful situation, the symptoms just kind of went off. So I think as a child, it was really like, wow, as a 7-year-old, you didn't really understand things like feelings or mental health, but it was like, whoa, just kind of removing myself from a place that gave me that much stress could change my health, my body, that was big. So I think the interest has always been there from then on, that, okay, what goes on in terms of our thoughts and how we feel can really affect life for people. And I think that was really the start. Yeah.
Wow, at 7 years old, you realize that this profession is your calling, like you want to be on this path one way or another. We know that there are many of us that had such experiences, but we do not necessarily think that it's psychological, or it can be cured just by getting deep into whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking at that moment. So knowing that at 7 is very big. I believe Kajol and I, we have our own sets of those emotions, or understanding or discovering ourselves, right? And I believe mine wasn't at 7. I don't even know what was going on when I was 7 years old.
I mean, I wouldn't say that at 7 I was like, yes, clinical psychology is the way to go, but I think that was just the spark, right? That hey, something that goes on up here and goes on down here had something to do with how people live their lives, and that's pretty important. I think it was really about being lucky enough to meet people who, kind of threw the idea of psychology around, parents who were understanding enough to kind of ditch the whole doctor dream and kind of go do what's best for you.
On that topic, right, I just want to see, there are many children now that are maybe suffering the same symptoms as you do. So anything to let them know. I know this is going to be a very workplace safety podcast. We are going there, guys, so don't worry. I just want to touch on this because most of you listeners are parents as well. So we want to break that stigma eventually, right? I think that's the mission for a lot of clinical psychologists out there. So what can you say to convince parents, to tell them that, hey, it's okay to bring them to see a therapist?
I think a lot of people's understanding about therapy is that you come in to fix something that's broken or wrong, right? And while, with clinical psychology, it sounds like it, right? You come to see me when you feel like you have depression and stuff like that. I think a lot of what people don't realize is preventive work, right? So like for myself, I think that incident back then, it didn't quite bother me. It wasn't like I was thinking about it as a child. It wasn't as though I was depressed at the time, but I think eventually not having a place to really process and understand what just happened to me kind of led on to me myself being diagnosed with depression, right? So rather than kind of coming from this viewpoint of, okay, my child seems to be fine, she doesn't seem to be, upset, or doesn't seem to look sad or angry, or doesn't seem to have any problems, so she doesn't need anything like that. More about, okay, well, something happened, all right, that there are specific challenges in your child's life, right? And children, they're not very good with feelings, right? A lot of times when the thing that stresses them or troubles them are not right in front of them, you'd see them kind of being normal, right? But a lot of times what happens at the back would be things like taking away messages, like, this happened because I wasn't good enough, right? Or this thing happened because I was a bad child. I'm not allowed to be bad anymore. So these things kind of brew over, and you see this a lot of times, I think, in adulthood. And by then, it would be a lot of work to undo years and years of such beliefs, I think. So I think for parents, and also I think for parents themselves as well, because we were once children, right? Kind of thinking back about, okay, what were significant events in our lives? And while they might not kind of be bothering us now, do they hold some sort of significance? to us? Do they change the way we see the world? Could it possibly change the way your child sees the world? And if so, kind of having therapy as an avenue to kind of explore, right, what was the takeaway message from the child when this thing happened, and kind of working with her, right? It's not that you were not good enough, or that, maybe it wasn't quite your fault, but things just happened, right? And how do we go about it better from then on? Adopting that sort of mindset rather than fixing something that's broken, I think.
With this in mind, we are talking about mental well-being at the workplace, right? So I just want to hear from your words. How do you define mental well-being, and why is it important in the workplace?
Right. I think well-being for me personally, just kind of building up on a lot of definitions out there. I think WHO has a pretty good one talking about realizing your abilities, responding to stress as well, and kind of contributing to the society. So I think for me, rather than it being kind of whether you have a disorder or not, whether you have a problem or not, it's more about being able to cope with whatever life throws your way in a way that still maximizes your abilities. So talking about resilience, right? A very big buzzword nowadays, resilience. So not so much about waiting for there to be an absence of problems in life, but even with whatever life presents its way, you having feelings about it, having thoughts about it, and that's completely fine, but not letting these feelings or these thoughts or these feelings of being upset kind of interfere with your ability to connect with people, to be productive, right, to live, right? So I think this is something a lot of people don't realize as well. It's not really about sickness or not sickness. It's really about your ability to function.
And it's important in the workplace,
Definitely.
especially if you're working at a very, very high risk job, I believe, because I think in workplaces like mining, like oil and gas, it's difficult if, let's say, the mental well-being is not there, but at the same time they are taking on tasks that are risking their lives.
Yeah, and I think a good analogy for this would be, say you have a stuffy nose, right? Say you have a stuffy nose. Not a big problem on its own. It's not illness, but imagine kind of going to work with that stuffy nose, and every now and then you have to sniff and look for tissue, and then you're just upset that you're having that stuffy nose, and it affects how you concentrate on your work. That affects you when you talk to people, because you're like, oh god, I look so horrible with my nose dripping and stuff like that. So you see how it doesn't really take a big problem to have well-being kind of being overrun. So especially I think with industries that you mentioned, focus and concentration are big things, right?
So Twinkle, we just want to understand what is the difference between, because there's a lot of categories, I believe. So what is the difference between depression, anxiety, and stress? If you can explain to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, I'll be talking about this in terms of the state of mind rather than the disorders, because I think putting out there, everybody feels depressed, everybody feels anxious, and everybody feels stressed. But whether you have the disorder or not is a separate matter, right? So depression is more about feeling quite low, feeling down in the dumps, quite blue, being quite pessimistic, feeling unhappy, right? And a lot of times with depression, it is really about this fixation with the past. So regret, unhappiness about how things are going and what happened in the past, right? So that makes it a little bit easier to understand. And that's very different from anxiety. Anxiety is very much focused on the future. So it's about this feeling of what's going to happen soon. Is something bad going to happen? I'm not quite sure what's coming up. Apprehension, right? You're expecting and you're waiting and you're not quite sure how things are going to turn out. And perhaps a lot of people would worry. They would kind of find themselves thinking over and over again about whether this or that will happen. So that's more about anxiety. And stress is about the current, right? So you're talking about timeline. Stress is about now. And stress is really a response to a very current stressor. Like there's a threat in the environment. There's something quite dangerous or something quite disturbing. And what that usually looks like is what we call the fight or flight response, right? So the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. So you have things like your heart beating really fast, your hands trembling and sweating, feeling flushed, kind of feeling difficulties breathing, and that's really stress, right? It's a very current response, a physical response to something that's right there in the environment.
So how can you relate this to a workplace burnout? Let's say someone is facing something at work. How can you relate to what you just said to that?
So burnout really is what we call long-term prolonged stress, chronic stress, right? Because stress, as mentioned earlier, is supposed to be a response to something that's immediate. And actually what stress does is it prepares us to respond to whatever's in the environment. So if you're talking there's a tiger there, stress helps you to really think and be optimum in either running away from it or fighting it, right? And troubleshooting that, right? And once the tiger is, it's supposed to help you there and then. And once the tiger's gone, you relax, right? This is not a system that is supposed to kind of go on and on and on. But with burnout, what happens is that the tiger is constantly there. So your body is always constantly in this state of agitation, preparedness, and just like waiting for something to happen, waiting just to fight or run away, right? And what that usually kind of looks like is, of course, physically and emotionally if you're very tired. In a workplace especially, I think what a lot of people experience is becoming very cynical and critical about things, feeling like, you know what, it's pointless, right? Feeling very disillusioned about the job. What am I doing this for? You're constantly overwhelmed. And of course, the most obvious one would be you're not productive. You're not as productive as you used to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wow, I really like how you explained the categories, the different categories like depression, what is anxiety, what is stress, because I think personally, I just understand it better. Yeah, because before this, I'm like, oh, they're all the same. I don't know which one is this, but now since you helped us explain it better, I kind of like, wow, this is out there, and like how you say, everyone is having it. It just depends
Definitely.
on the level. Yeah. Thanks for
right.
sharing about that.
I'm
Glad
glad that
that
helped.
helped.
I just cannot get my mind over the whole depression. It's something to do with your past. Anxiety is something to do with the
The
future.
future.
Stress is something to do with now.
Ah.
And then when you explain about workplace burnout, then yes, it's a continuous stress, right? So it's like a never-ending cycle. I just want to share this story. I used to work not in Malaysia, so there is this very toxic workplace environment. That's everybody overpowering each other and things like that. So having workplace burnout is something that many of us do not know. I didn't know I had it when I was in that environment, right? So I was just constantly questioning, like, why am I doing this job? Did I really, really like it? Did I really move from my previous job to do this? Like, is it worth it? And at the end of the day, because the workplace was so stressful and like I had such a big like episode of crying and breaking down after that, I realized that the self-esteem level it dropped tremendously even after years, like after 2-3 years of leaving that toxic workplace, right? It followed and it haunted me for a while. And I felt like I cannot do anything wrong. If I do anything wrong, then I will have like an attack where I cannot function anymore. That's when I went to therapy to just get this sorted, right? So many of us do not know that it will follow us. Like the workplace burnout doesn't happen at one place and then just died there. It may fall to another place. And talking about it now, it still gives me some trembles because I'm still very afraid of it. I understand how it feels. I was there before. But yeah, just want to throw this out there so that anyone that's facing burnout, don't think that after you quit your job and then everything's going to be fine. It may be fine after a while, but to those of you who still suffers from side effects of this workplace burnout, I think it's best to look for therapy just to get it sorted, like just to settle it. And yeah, I feel like I'm at therapy now talking to Twinkle, but
Yeah. I mean, because I think all of us have the different traumas. I went through something as similar to Amanda's story, actually. So I'm a journalist. I write, and now I'm an editor. So you can see, like, I've grown over the years as a person and throughout my career. So when I was just going into the journalism world, I had a senior. She was very, she used to torment me, used to say things. Yeah, it was really very difficult to work in that environment, that I would go home every day and cry. And like how Amanda said, it's a trauma. So when no matter how much you've grown, you will always be fearful of, like, oh no, I'm still doing this. I'm still in that career, like I'm still writing. So there will always be the fear in me, like someone is going to come up and just say something. So that is something that, I carry throughout these years. So it can be really very demotivating to me, that I really didn't want to go into writing anymore after that incident. But eventually I found a better company. I noticed that it was not it's always, you are always a better person with a non-toxic in a non-toxic environment. Yeah.
Yes, with that in mind, right? I know we are talking about long-term workplace stress. So
Yeah.
how we see that there are long-term effects. The question is, what are the long-term effects of workplace stress that we may face?
Well, I think to begin with, both of your stories highlight something that's pretty important that people don't see in terms of stress. So a lot of people see it as something quite situational, which is true, right? Having a senior who is very dismissive and horrible to you, being in a place where you feel lonely and not fulfilled, like in Amanda's case, right? But a lot of times it goes a little bit deeper than that. I think a lot of times this incidents or situations, the real threat is not so much of the place, but that this incident threatens something that we hold dear, something that's important to us. So that is quite the real threat, actually. So I think when the both of you talking about taking away this sort of fear or those kind, it almost seems like there are lessons that were took away from those situations. I think it reflects a lot about how that environment or those situations really has something that goes against what we believe in.
Workplace burnout.
Right? Rather than the senior being the problem, it's more about when the senior is right in front of me, she goes against what I believe in or what I care about, right? And that in itself is extremely frustrating, right? So it's just distressing. That's the first long-term effect of workplace stress. It feels horrible, right? And it can come back to haunt you. But on the other hand, this doesn't get talked about as much as well. If you think about how stress is supposed to be short term, right? There's this study that does measure productiveness at different levels of stress. So at low levels of stress, moderate and high, it's a inverse U-shaped curve. So what they found, which means that moderate stress was very good for productivity. Low stress was not, because obviously you're not as motivated and you don't care as much. High levels of stress was very bad for productivity, right? And what this kind of means is that there is a lot of resources that gets taken up in being stressed. It's supposed to help you, but if you constantly use up all the resources in your body to kind of keep up that, okay, we're waiting for something bad to happen, we are waiting to respond, we're waiting to respond to this scary thing, the first thing that will get impacted is your physical health. Right, so a lot of people with stress have also very comorbid things like shoulder aches, neck aches, migraines, headaches, and those are quite short-term physical things, right? And sometimes doctors also kind of go like, I don't really know where that comes from. Stress is one. But in the even longer kind of time frame, you see things like increased risk for high blood pressure, heart disease, and overall reduced lifespan. Because you think about it, all your energy is put into being stressed. So how much of it that goes to your digestive system, how much of that goes into your body, like keeping up normal functions that your body should go. So a lot of people see workplace stress as something that's quite compartmentalized, like it stays in the workplace, but I think it's rarely the case. It does kind of seep into other areas as well.
Yeah, I think when you talked about affecting one's daily life, right? I think for my case, it was the loss of sleep. I couldn't sleep. I think I slept for, I think, probably just 4 or 5 hours an entire week, because I just can't sleep anymore when I have those stress. So I don't really know at that time whether it was anxiety because I was afraid of what's going to happen at work. But I believe that it's against my values. That's why it's stressful for me. So I was brought up and taught that leadership should be a certain way, right? So when it's against that, like when it's always embarrassing you or always putting you down in the public setting, like in a meeting with clients and things like that. So those sort of environments cause me fear. And I think until now, with therapy, I managed to get through whatever that has happened, and be a better self at the moment. So to those of you who are going through this sort of environment in your workplace, seek for help, right? You do not necessarily need to leave your job, but just seek for help.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad to hear that you kind of took up therapy rather than just focus on changing the environment, Amanda, because I think, again, it's really about something a little bit more underlying, and it doesn't quite matter whether it's anxiety or stress or depression, because either way, it is a threat, right? But I'm glad to hear that that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I too went through the same thing. I took up psychologist. I mean, I went to visit a psychologist, and yeah, it took me 2 years, I think, to get over that. Yeah, and I was diagnosed right after that with severe anxiety. So that was, going through that. And when I came into this new working environment, I was holding a lot of fear. But as time went on, when I knew how I want to treat people rather than how people should treat me, because I think that what you give is what you get. So there's
Right.
something.
It's like I hear about you using the anxiety as a reflection of how you want to act otherwise, and I think that's really inspiring, Kajol.
Thank you. So I think we just went through the worst pandemic. I think a lot of things happened during the pandemic. So in your opinion, how has the pandemic affected one's mental well-being in the workplace?
To begin with, let's just kind of start with what the pandemic means for the workplace. Adjustments and changes. A lot of us had to change from, being around with colleagues, having lunchtime, the commute routines, to something that is completely foreign. Right? Having to work from home, having to think about what do I do for lunch, how do I talk to my colleagues, how do I communicate with my boss when I could just walk into his room. A lot of changes, a lot of adjustments, right? And that on its own is very anxiety provoking. So I think throughout my time kind of practicing, and I did this when I was in a hospital before, and it was right smack in the pandemic kind of MCO time. I actually did a very short survey with some of the patients that I had, and of course some very kind volunteers from the public. And what I noticed is that anxiety rather than depression and stress was high for a lot of people, because there's a lot of uncertainty. Will I lose my job? Will I get fired? How is this going to look like? How are we going to host our meetings? There's a lot of question marks, I think, that the pandemic has brought up. And that is really, really hard. And a lot of people talk about, well, it's just about changing work environments. Well, that's true, but these things add up. Right? There are so many things that we had to respond to, and we weren't quite sure how long this pandemic was going to go on. We weren't sure how things would change. We weren't sure if we would get COVID. That's a lot, and things kind of pile up. So anxiety is really one way that I see being a really direct effect of the pandemic. But also, not just the changes. I think the pandemic has robbed a lot of people of things like connection and ways to manage their feelings. We used to be able to go shopping, right? Which for a lot of people is stress relieving, right? We used to go to cafes with friends, and it's not so much about the food itself, although food does bring pleasure, but it's also about being able to be with people that we love, right? People that kind of help support us. So it has cut off a lot of these support systems that we used to take for granted so easily, right? So of course, this is a very bad time for mental health, for mental well-being, I think, the whole pandemic. And I'm really glad that it's almost over. For now, yeah? We're taking this with a big pinch of salt, but yeah.
So I'm just thinking, right? Because I think most of us, I think in the region, Singapore, Malaysia, Southeast Asia in general, we are going back to
normal.
pandemic times, like
Yeah.
pre-COVID times. So I think the stress level or the anxiety level now, it's going to be different. I think everybody is worried for other things.
Yes, the whole new set of adjustments now.
Yeah,
Right.
so I think one of the biggest ones that we see nowadays is like, oh no, I need to go back to office.
Yes.
Make my time, my travel time back in the office. So to those of you who are having mental well-being issues at your workplace, yeah, I think Twinkle is here to help us, give us some tips on how we can improve our mental well-being at the workplace.
Definitely. And I think, of course, the most important part is what we call self-care. All right? Regardless of what you're facing or what you're going through, it doesn't change the fact that just surviving takes a lot of work. You know, just living takes a lot of resources out of us. It doesn't matter physical or not. Right? And I think self-care is a big buzzword again now. But what it really means is actually listening to our bodies, our minds, and our feelings. Right? So it could be as simple as taking a 5-minute break where you stop thinking about what else is on the to-do list, right? Just breathing for a while, just kind of being there for a little bit, taking care of your body, you know, healthy food, healthy diet, things, exercise, things like that, and also feeding needs, right? Emotional and thoughts, like through having a space and time to read a good book, doing things that matter to you, and kind of connecting with people. Right, all this not in favor of just kind of preventing or in response to like, wow, something bad happened, and then we take care of ourselves. Not really that, but kind of keeping up, maintaining yourself. So whatever life throws your way, at least your body, your feelings, and your mind is in a better place to respond. Right, and this is something that takes effort. It's not something that's easy. You know, making sure you eat balanced meals, making sure you have sufficient sleep, making sure you make time to connect with people. These are effortful. But I believe, you know, if this is something that we put effort and we put importance in, it will help significantly, you know, when life throws us challenges. That's one, right? And of course, when we talk about mental well-being in the workplace, I think this is a good, the fact that you guys are here and listening is a good kind of sign that all of you are concerned, all right, about how you're doing. I think it's a good reminder for all of us to take a look at our lives, right? What sort of things stress us out in the workplace especially, right? What sort of things do we find ourselves repeatedly getting upset about, getting frustrated about, feeling tired, feeling resentful about? Kind of going, okay, if this is a thing, where is this coming from? What can I do, right? Because I feel horrible every time that happens. What can I do to make this less distressing for me? Are there practical solutions like perhaps there's one colleague that tends to give pretty harsh feedbacks, maybe talking to that colleague and say, I appreciate your feedback. Could this be in a more gentler way? I'd appreciate that. Or if it's something that you cannot change, changing how we respond to that, kind of going, okay, I feel upset about this, but the whole point of this feedback thing was for me to improve. So kind of finding ways to kind of negate what tends to upset us.
Yeah, I think a very good point there. I went to therapy and I had this one check sheet or my cheat sheet on how to control whatever I feel or say or think. Say you have a problem, right? So look at the problem and then look at whether you can control. It's an environment that you can control. If it's out of your control, then it's not your problem. But if it's something you can control, then you do something about it. And if you feel good after doing that, then that's a plus for you already. Like there's no need to overthink things. Just look at the problem. Is it something I can control? If it's not my problem.
Definitely. And I think, Amanda, you bring a good point as well about therapy, which I think is also definitely something you could do to improve well-being. And again, kind of building up on what Amanda says, not so much of like, oh my gosh, I'm having panic attacks, so I go to therapy, But also kind of going in with this aim of better understanding yourself, what you tend to struggle with, why things affect you a certain way, and finding ways to kind of cope with that or respond to that differently, more effectively. Right, so please don't feel like, things have to be severe or my problem has to be big enough for me to see a therapist. It doesn't work like that, right? A lot of this is more, it doesn't have to be about firefighting. It's also preventive, right? Understanding yourself and kind of knowing, okay, this is a thing. It's not a big thing, but it's a thing, right? And it's deserving of help and support, regardless, right?
Wow, I think that whatever you have shared with us today is just, I think it's going to stay in my head for the longest time, because I've never heard anyone explaining it to me like, in such a nice way, like, okay, do you understand what I'm saying? I think you are very knowledgeable, Twinkle, and we would be seeing you in the second episode. So I would just like to thank you and thank our listeners for listening to us today. And yeah, we'll see you in the second part of this episode.
Thank you, everybody. See you.